You're listening to The Science of CX. My name is Steve Pappas. I'm known for my relentless pursuit of all things customer. Across my career, and also in my 6 startups, I've had to learn how to make decisions in business that customers really respond to. Let's spend some time together and help your business soar, grow, and accelerate, along with my co-host, Angela Simpson. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of The Science of CX. As always, I'm Steve Pappas, one of your hosts for Science of CX, and with me I have the lovely Angela Simpson. Angela, how are you today?
I'm fabulous today. You know, it's my half-anniversary. 2.5 years ago, you were at my wedding.
I was. And what a party that was.
And we could do a whole segment on the customer experience that day, couldn't we?
I think we could. There were a few things, a little hiccup there that I could tell by the look on your face, partly through the reception, that you were steaming about something, but it happens. But overall, it was a wonderful, wonderful time.
It was. But we are not here to talk about my wedding today. Who's our guest?
So our guest today is Annette Franz. And Annette comes to us as one of the top CX experts out there. And I'm actually flabbergasted we were able to get time on her schedule. Annette, thank you for joining us today. This is really something for us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, this is going to be something, and we want to cover a lot of areas. But let me tell folks a little bit about you, just so people understand exactly who Annette Franz is, and as if they couldn't find you everywhere by just doing a Google search on you. But with almost 30 years in customer experience, Annette Franz is an internationally recognized customer experience thought leader. She's a coach. She's a keynote speaker and an author of Customer Understanding, 3 ways to put the customer in customer experience and at the heart of your business. She is also now the 2020 CXPA board chair, and she's one of the CX influencers for Panviva, our sponsor. So let's just jump right in, Annette, and let's talk a little bit about what's going on at the executive level. I know one of the things that we talked about before is, maybe some of the misconceptions that executives are under when it comes to CX in their businesses. Where do we begin? Let's get started there.
Yeah, that's a tough place to start. Wow, let's just hit it hard. Let's hit it hard from the get-go, because it's true. The executives, I don't know that the sentiment has changed all that much over the years about, focusing on the customer experience and focusing on the customer and building these customer-centric cultures. It's, we're still having the same conversations about prove it to me. Why do I have to do this? Why is this important? And, my thinking on it is, it's all about the customer. That's why we're in business. It's because of the customer. It's for the customer. And if we have no customers, we have no business. And so it is still a very challenging conversation for many. There are a few, I will say there are a few who get it, and maybe a few more now than years ago. But yeah, it's still a challenge for those in the profession to really convince their CEOs and their executives that this is where we need to focus a lot of effort.
Right. Well, why don't we start with who does get it? I mean, there are some companies that get it from the get-go, and they understand that they're going to build a business based on the customer. And certainly Sam Walton said, they pay all of our salaries, so treat them right. Exactly. But, who gets it? And what are they doing differently? What are they doing that puts them in the top levels as we see them from a CX level?
A recent favorite of mine, and not just, I've been tracking this company for several years now, because I'll just throw it out there. Delta Airlines. I've traveled. Delta is, my favorite airline, and I've traveled on Delta for many, many years, and it's been interesting to watch their sort of evolution to where they are today. And yeah, their CEO gets it. They really focus on the customer experience, and I'll swerve the conversation here a little bit. And part of that too is because he really gets that he has to focus on employees too, and the employee experience is a good one as well. So, but even with this pandemic, and travel starting to pick up again, just the fact that they hand passengers a little kit with a mask and the hand sanitizer and sanitizing wipes and stuff like that as they board the plane is just another way of saying, hey, we care about you, So I'm definitely a Delta fangirl right now. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, probably also, I think a lot of the others that there's Southwest Airlines, obviously, and I won't just stick with the airlines, but Southwest Airlines, Zappos is another, favorite brand of mine. They care about their employees, and ultimately the customer experience is really a great one as well. There's the other usual suspects, Ritz-Carlton, so I think but I just wanted to call out a couple that, especially Delta, which doesn't always get the due that they deserve in terms of both the customer experience and the employee experience.
So have these brands, to your, perception, did they start out that way, or did they evolve that way? And, and is it really the culture inside, the top down? I mean, I guess there's a lot of aspects to whether or not they're really getting it, they're doing it right, they're the brands to hold up there. And, are they delivering a true culture internally, which gives the employees that feeling of home, and they really love where they work, and that translates to the customer. But, where does it begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let's just look at those three brands, right? Let's look at Zappos, Southwest, and Delta. Zappos and Southwest, we know intentionally started that way, right? The culture, the focusing on the employees, and knowing that is going to ultimately, lead to a great experience for customers. Delta was not always, Delta was definitely not always known for the greatest customer experience, But like I said, I've been flying them for many, many years, and really noticed probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I was working remotely and flying back and forth to Utah from Southern California every other week, and Delta has a hub in Salt Lake City, right? And so that was sort of a natural for me to choose to get a quick nonstop flight up there, and that's when I first started noticing a real change in the experience for passengers on Delta. So that was an evolution for them. I don't know what the catalyst was back then, like who within the organization made that decision, but I know their current CEO, Ed Bastian, is very focused on customers, very focused on employees, and making sure that everybody's taken care of.
Annette, that just seems like such an obvious leap. If you keep your employees happy and productive, they're going to take good care of your customers. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough, the healthcare organization I worked for 25 years, one great place to work the past 3 years running. They got that concept. What do you think keeps some companies from getting it?
I think it's funny because I had this conversation with somebody maybe about 10 years ago, and it's still about that old adage, the management philosophy, I guess, that we're in business to maximize shareholder value, that was taught back in the 50 years ago, and some of these executives have come up through the ranks through that sort of education. That's what they learned. That's what they taught. That's what they've always seen. And the conversation that I had with somebody about 10 years ago was, maybe things aren't going to change until we have some new executives, right? It's, when the younger folks start moving up, that those folks who weren't indoctrinated in we're in business to maximize shareholder value. I think, and we're starting to see some of that, but there's also, there's folks out there, like, this is probably my favorite CEO, Bob Chapman, CEO of Barry Waymiller in St. Louis. He just sort of had this epiphany one day, listening to his employees, listening to his people, and just sort of observing and saying, people are in my care, quote unquote, my care, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And they leave here feeling worse and in worse shape and worse condition than they were when they first got here this morning. My job is to ensure that that when they leave here at the end of the day, that they are in the same, literally in the same shape or better than when they got here. Because when they go home, if they've had a bad experience, they're going to take it out on their spouse, on their family, on whoever. And that leads to, other issues down the line, whether it's divorce or, blah, 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 whatever it is. Right. And so there are CEOs who suddenly they have this epiphany and they're like, yeah, we got to do things differently. So, and it's interesting because he and Simon Sinek created a leadership institute I think it was about 8 years ago, to really get that message out to executives today. So that's very cool.
It's interesting. I just wanted to touch back on something that you said earlier, that you noticed the evolution of Delta Airlines when you started traveling them a lot. It seems like you can't hide whether you're a brand that is very customer experience focused or not. It seems like people notice, the consumer notices both the upward trend and the downward trend.
Yep.
I mean, I could say, and I'm not going to name airlines, but I knew exactly when the airline that I was traveling a lot started looking at profits over customers, and you could feel as things were just going away, and it was getting tougher and tougher to do anything that you used to do, and really you felt it. It's almost like there's a sea change that happens, and consumers are very aware. And I just wanted to make that point, that both up and down, the consumer knows. So you don't hide it, you can't hide it.
Yep, so true. Yeah, absolutely.
And whatever the consumer knows and whatever the employee knows is also going to show up on social media.
Yeah. And then it's going to show up in the bottom line ultimately. So,
right.
Yeah.
So maybe let's talk a little bit more about what it takes from your perspective, and you've talked about it in your book, and you've talked about to be more human and to be more empathetic. But maybe we could talk about, what does it take to really achieve that level of status amongst consumers, that your brand has really done things right?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and a fair question. Empathy is sort of the hot buzzword again now. It always has been in this profession, but especially with the pandemic and everything that's happening right now, empathy has suddenly become the thing that everybody wants to be, which is awesome. We should always operate with empathy. Empathy should be the standard language of our organization, kind of. So in order to do that, in order to be empathetic, to be more human, to have that sort of standard language, you have to take the time to understand your customers, right? I mean, that's what the whole book is about too, right? And empathy, at the root of empathy, is understanding. And so when we do the work to really understand the person in front of us, that's when we can really act and speak with empathy, right? I think that's such an important thing. And that, I talk about the 3 ways to understand the customer: listen, characterize, and empathize. Listen is all about, feedback and the data. Characterize is about developing personas and really getting into the heads and hearts and, what's going on and what are they hearing and seeing and feeling, and, pain points and problems to solve. And then empathizing is about journey mapping and really understanding what the experience is today, so that we can understand what we what we keep doing versus what we need to, fix going forward. So that understanding and really taking the time to get to know our customers and then operating in an outside in manner, using that understanding to design better experiences and to design experiences that are for the customer, because we know who the customer is and we understand, what they're going through and what their needs and pain points and problems to solve are. And we're going to help them with that based on the products that we create and the services we develop. That's really where it's at. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm wondering, do you think the executives think that, well, okay, we've adopted this more customer experience focused approach. We are trying to evolve our company. Do they then look to HR to say, do we have the right people to achieve it? Or can we help our people do the right things? Can we empower them? Where do those decisions in the boardrooms and in the C-suite, where do those decisions happen from your experience?
Yeah, well, I always say that, if you want to have a customer-centric culture, the culture has to be deliberately designed to be customer-centric, right? And that has to come from the CEO and from the entire C-suite, right? Everybody has to be committed to making that happen. So that's a really important thing to understand, is that it just doesn't happen on its own. It may, that leads me into a point about culture and core values, right? Because core values are really at the heart of this too. We have to make sure that we have the right core values in place that support and encourage the behavior that we're looking to emanate, that everybody does. So, so that's an important piece of it, is deliberately designed. The core values have to be in place, core values and the associated behaviors. And then, back to your point about HR, once those core values are in place, then we hire, fire, promote based on our core values. We make sure that we hire based on culture fit, all of those things. So, but the root of it really is that the culture, that's the foundation, and making sure that leadership has, designed the culture that ultimately the organization must have.
Yeah, you can have the most capable and the most experienced employees, but they might not necessarily be the most empathetic. I had a company that I had done some business with in the UK back a number of years, and they told me that they completely changed their hiring practices over time. And instead of just looking for the most experienced people in a particular area, they started looking for the most empathetic people they could find. So they started recruiting out of hospice, out of nursing homes, out of elder care, out of other industries, because they were fundamentally already caregiving and very empathetic to what the customer in the case of in that case,
right,
needed. And so you might have to change a few things along the way too.
Yeah.
Our organization made the commitment, I think just last year. One of the incentives was everyone in the entire organization had to take a class, and there were very limited class offerings because there were certain skills we wanted to get through our entire culture. And one of them was a program that I helped to develop called Caring with Heart. And that was specifically on empathetic listening. And one of the areas we were actually targeting were the executives and the physicians, who, a lot of them had come through with amazing technical skills, but had never been trained on some of those skills that make you a more empathetic leader. And we also noticed here fairly recently in one of my health communication courses that medical schools are beginning to have offerings on teaching empathy, because we were raising clinicians who didn't have that skill.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, the old adage, going back to your point about before that, because yeah, a lot of people, that's a whole other set of questions too. Is empathy something that we can teach? And I do believe it is. But to the points before that, the old adage, hire for attitude, train for skills, is so true, because some of these things, you just can't teach people. Some of it has to come from within too. You have to be a caring person. And I'll go back to a conversation that I had with Bob Chapman, the CEO of Barry Waymiller. And it was about that. It was about a client that I was working with. And I said, how can I make the CEO care about what it is that we're doing and care about his people and all that? And Bob was basically like, you know what? You can't make somebody care. That has to come from within. That, like, some of those traits and some of those attitudes really do have to just come from within.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've done a lot of speaking around startups and early growth, and I've always been telling them the same thing. If you're operating out of an exit strategy or operating out of a VC directed path, you're not necessarily on the customer's path,
right?
And you really have to rethink. And I tend to work with more companies that are looking to grow great businesses, and that's the way they begin. Whether it's at the startup level, the idea point before that, the incubation, the challenge, or even to the early stages. It's an important piece. And with that, we're going to take a very short break and a word from our sponsor.
Panviva has 25 years of empowering customer service, and we have deep expertise in how people actually use information, from our roots in learning and performance. We offer accurate, consistent information on demand to every channel. Most relevant knowledge at your people's exact moment of need. Integrated, streamlined internal processes. Systems that deliver memorable and remarkable customer experiences that boost customer retention and loyalty every time. Knowledge that extends across your entire digital landscape. To learn more, visit Panviva at www.panviva.com.
And we're back. I have to, and I apologize that we're firing all these things at you, but it's not often we get an expert, at your level of expertise that we can ask the hard hitting questions of. So this is a treat for us. So I got to think that within an organization there are many competing agendas, and I don't know if you've ever read the book Sabotage in America. It's really about how middle management and down can sabotage the direction that you're setting out at the top level for an organization. So I always tell people that the doers can be your undoing. Yeah. And I'm wondering if we talk about the various silos in an organization, how do you recommend for companies that are going down this path to be able to break down the barriers that they are going to face? Because there are always people that say, well, gee, I don't believe in that direction, or I'm not coming along for the ride, or it's too much of a change. It's too far a change for me on a personal basis.
Yeah, great question. I just jotted down some quick notes as you were saying that. So first point you made was about competing agendas, which is really interesting because I've seen some research where CX professionals were surveyed about, why you're, going back to our, your very first question, why is it such a challenge to get, executive commitment and to get the financial and the other resources that we need to do this work. And one of the top answer was competing priorities. And and it's like, well, what competes with the customer, So that's so I throw that out there. Competing priorities. What competes with the customer? Again, we're in business for the customer. Okay, so on to your question about the silos, though. I usually look at this in two different ways, right? So again, we just talked about culture. Culture really is the foundation. If you think about silos, there's no walls. There's no physical walls to keep people from sharing information, talking to each other, sharing data, all of that. And so culture really is at the foundation of why these silos exist, right? Somewhere, somehow, the organization started that way. And the interesting thing about culture is, I believe it should be deliberately designed, from the top, but sometimes there's a grassroots effort and you get the behavior and the culture that you allow, and the culture that's been allowed in these organizations where silos are built and people don't, they kind of huddle around their work and don't want to share and don't work together and everything is part of that culture too. And then I think about, my second thought about that is that how we can, bridge the gap, how we can either break down or connect those silos, because some folks say some silos are good, and I don't disagree with that. So how do we connect those silos? When it comes to customer experience and the work that customer experience professionals do, I say that the governance will help to break those down, right, or to connect those. We can't get this work done if we all just operate in our silos, and ultimately the customer is going to feel it, right? Customer is going to call into the call center and get one experience, and then go into the store and get a completely different experience and information and all of that, and it's painful. I just did a journey mapping workshop yesterday with somebody who said the exact same thing, and he said too that if he goes to 3 different stores, he gets 3 different answers and 3 different experiences. So that's a problem, right? So we do need to bridge the gap, either connect or break down the silos so that the entire organization is on the same page. And as we dive into this CX work and the CX strategy, we've got to also set up our governance, which is, there's 2 sides to that, right? There's the committees, and then there's the operating model is what I like to call it. And the committees are really, these cross-functional committees that bring these cross-functional, these siloed departments together in the, for the best interest of the customer. So I think that's an important thing to look at in terms of breaking down those silos.
Makes sense. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how CX has changed, or how CX has had to change during the work from home and the lockdown during this pandemic, just so that we were thinking about what companies are going through and how they're approaching it as approaching a crisis and coming out of the crisis.
Yep. So a couple of my thought is, and it was so funny as this all started going down, I went back to an article that I wrote back in, I think it was 2012, where everybody kept, every year people kept asking about, are you ready for Black Friday? Are you ready for Black Friday? Are you ready for Black Friday? And the article that I wrote basically said, why do we keep asking, are we ready? Why don't we already have, again, the culture, the work, everything in place so that, we've talked about empathy. We've talked about treating people as humans. We've talked about, breaking down silos and streamlined and seamless experiences, all of that. Why don't we already have that in place, right? And if we do, then when we go into a crisis or we go into a Black Friday or whatever it is, we just keep operating the way that we've always operated. There's going to be some nuances, yes, to adapt and to adapt to what's happening and to what's happening for the customer in front of us. But, look at Zappos, for example. I mean, they keep doing and posting and sharing and talking about the same things that they did 6 months ago. And oh, by the way, and they've always done this, but they haven't ever broadcast it. But they'll provide customer service for any product, not just shoes or not just anything that they sell. Today, they will provide service for any product you have a question about. And so that's the interesting thing. So that's, and those companies are few and far between, right? So others have had to definitely step up and really take a look at what they're doing today. And it's really interesting because one of the things that we're really seeing over the last couple of months is how companies have put the health and safety of their employees first and foremost, and how many customers, and I've seen some research on this, how many customers say, I don't want to do business with a brand that doesn't put the health and safety of their employees first. So that's been a really nice thing that's happened during this. Unfortunately, they should always be doing that, but I feel like there's a broader awareness of that now. And as we talked about earlier, the employee experience really affects the customer experience. So I think that's one of the biggest things that's really happened over the last couple of months. And then we've got to really understand, because customers are everybody's going through so many different things, right? You've lost your job, you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your mortgage. And so we've really got to, personalization has never been more important than today, right? We have to take the time to really know and understand the customer sitting in front of us and the situation that they're going through, so that we can, deliver an experience that is, specifically for them. So.
Well, Annette, we talked about that if you're doing business the right way at all times, then when you do have these fluctuations, these strange changes in global events, you're ready to go. Can we talk a little bit about the knowledge and the processes that should already be in place, so that some of these things aren't quite so earth-shattering to our employees and therefore to our customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Every company should. And here's the other word or phrase that's really popular these days is business continuity, right? If we do pre-mortems, if we every year, have these meetings and sessions and or on an ongoing basis, right? What if, what if this happens? What's the risk of what should we be prepared for? Maybe some businesses already do that. Maybe they haven't done it on a large enough scale or a broad enough scale, and maybe they're focused on things that aren't pandemic-like or whatever. But I really I believe in doing these pre-mortems, which is really thinking about what are the risks that lie ahead for the business, for the products, for our employees, for everything, and really laying out, how will we address those if those happen? So I think there are companies that have obviously done that. We saw so many companies that were able to pivot so quickly early on. So that is happening to some degree, but I know that there are plenty of others who do not do that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, I've seen a lot of companies that live 100% of the time making sure that the process is being adhered to without it being robotic to anybody, but making sure that they're always looking at the latest version of the process. And they have tools in place to be able to do that and bring the knowledge necessary so that when you are hit with something, it's not as catastrophic to the organization when you have to move 1,000 people from a contact center out to their homes. And now all of their survival skills and all of their resources are not necessarily there, but now they are via chat, not over the cubicle type of a thing. And some get it, but a lot don't necessarily prepare for it. So I think a couple of great things that you said there, and earlier you really talked about governance, and the CX type of governance is very important to make sure that we're working as one organization towards the customer. And that I think we could take as a great takeaway, and also looking at having your processes in place and doing the right journey mapping and all of the process mapping that goes into the journey map. So the lower level stuff that has to get done too, the details.
Yep. It's at the root of why the experience goes the way it goes, right? So you've got to do that service blueprint, that process map to figure out why the experience is breaking down for the customer. So yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Yeah, I think our organization was fortunate on timing. We had just had a major expansion of our knowledge base out to a lot of our offices and branch locations just before the pandemic really started to peak in our area. So then we had that structure in place to be able to make sure we were getting a uniform message out to all locations, and that our employees were confident that as long as they were following it, they were giving out the right information for today, because new stuff was coming out not only every day but almost every hour. Everything was changing on them. And it took a lot of stress away from the employees to know that, okay, this is the place that I go, and I can make sure that I'm giving the right information to our patients.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the time that we've got today. Annette, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for allowing us to really pick your brain over this last half hour, because it was a real treat for us to be able to sit down with you, get your expertise, and really hear your thoughts on some of these things. So this is wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. I'd love to talk about all things CX. So this was a great conversation. We dug into some good topics here for sure. So thank you.
Sounds great. So if folks want to hear more from Annette, I really urge you to go to www.cx-journey.com, and you can find out everything about what's going on with Annette, and look at Amazon for the book Customer Understanding: 3 Ways to Put the Customer in the Customer Experience and at the Heart of Your Business. Thank you once again, Annette. Thanks, Angela. Everyone, till next time, I'm Steve Pappas, and you're listening to The Science of CX. You've been listening to The Science of CX. My name is Steve Pappas. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, the highest compliment that you can give us is to subscribe, rate, and review The Science of CX. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next episode.